Chapter 60. Kerry and Fritz. A couple of months after I left the GWF, I was watching TV, and it popped up on the news, the Von Erich tragedy hits again. All three networks in Dallas were covering it. Kerry Von Erich had committed suicide. Kerry had been going through a lot of legal problems, wasn't thinking clearly and never had that moment of clarity that one is supposed to have, realizing that he seriously needed help. When he couldn't find a doctor who would prescribe him drugs, he stole some prescription pads and wrote his own. That's how lost he was. Then, when it was looking like he was going to have to serve some prison time, Kerry decided to end it all. Fritz had a 50-acre ranch with about 20 cows on the property. It was a place where the boys used to go and play as children. There was a great big sycamore tree that must be more than 100 years old. It's one of those huge Gothic trees. It was the boys' favorite tree, and was a quarter of a mile from the ranch house. On that day, Kerry told his dad he was going to go by the tree and do some target practice, so Fritz went to make something for him to eat and told him to be back soon. After waiting for a while, it got to be dark, so Fritz jumped on his tractor and went looking for the truck. When he pulled up to the truck, he could see Kerry sitting in an upright position under the tree where he and his brothers used to play. He had put a gun to his heart and pulled the trigger, and his poor father found him there. This was the fifth Von Erich boy to die, and the third to have killed himself. I just couldn't understand the continuous cycle of suicides, so I did some research and learned that if suicide is in a family's history, even a generation removed, then that family is more apt to look at suicide as an alternative to life. Therefore, when life got too difficult and the burden to carry on became too much, it really wasn't all that unusual for Kerry to have made the choice he did. I don't think that he rationally understood what impact his death would have on those that truly loved and cared about him, even though he himself had been affected by suicide. It's very easy for people to say that Kerry Von Erich was a spoiled drug addict and a screw-up, but by doing that they fail to see that he was simply someone who got in trouble and didn't get the help he needed to get out of it. I truly, in my heart of hearts, believe that. Addiction has no prejudices at all. Anyone that gets involved in drug addiction will lose. It will take your soul. I don't care if it's prescription medication, cocaine, crack, meth, heroin, or alcohol. Once you give yourself up to an addiction, your life is all downhill. The sad thing is, as you get further down that hill, you find that you're farther away from the people that care the most about you. For some morbid reason, I figured out the space between the deaths of David, Mike, Chris, and Kerry, and it was amazing. It was an average of every 3 years. And we can't forget about Jack Jr. Fritz and I talked about him often during the 70s. After David's death, he really started talking about him, and after Mike died, Fritz and I had some very long conversations about Jack Jr. It takes someone far stronger than me to comprehend how one survives when you have 6 children, then 4 of them go in mysterious circumstances and another dies in a horrible accident. It makes me mad when I hear people say that Fritz Von Erich is responsible for what happened to his other children by pressuring them to go into wrestling. Believe me, those boys wanted it from when they were kids. They used to tell me that they were going to wrestle me when they grew up. There are so many myths about the Von Erich family. I know people enjoy it and love the dirt, but I have a deep hurt, and don't have time for a lot of that nonsense. I've heard all the rumors, innuendo, and outright lies about them, but the people who make those accusations weren't there, I was. Over the years, I have read many autobiographies from various wrestlers, and so many of them have devoted a page or two in order to spread salacious gossip about the Von Erich family, get down on the boys, and make their judgments be known. The hypocritical thing about that is that in 90% of those cases, the wrestler writing the book could just as easily have spent a page or two knocking their own kids in the way they led their lives, but they don't. They're too busy casting aspersions and getting their pointless cheap shots in on the Von Erich children. Other wrestlers seem to love using sleazy stories about the Von Erich family to their advantage, but they never seem to want to look in their own closet, do they? And if the Von Erich boys were nothing but unreliable drug addicts as so many revisionist historians would have us believe, would somebody please explain to me how they drew so much money for so long not only in Texas, but in St. Louis, Japan, and a host of other places, as well? I have been close to the Von Erich family since 1966, and no one saw the grief and heartache better than I did. I witnessed firsthand the destruction of a good family, and watched all of the kids who called me Uncle Gary die one by one. By writing this book, I hope I have given you a different perspective on who the Von Erich boys were, and how they weren't just a bunch of drugged-out guys. Yes, they had problems, but I tried to go beyond that and give you some insight into what I saw, and hopefully clear up all of those myths. The constant deaths eventually destroyed Fritz and Doris's marriage. When you lose 5 kids, who are you going to blame? Doris blamed Fritz, and Fritz blamed Doris. Eventually it got to a point where just looking at each other brought back too many painful memories, so after being married for over 40 years, they split up. She and Fritz had a wonderful life together until the tragedies started happening. They truly lived the American dream. Somehow, for some reason, it all went bad. At some point, Fritz got sick with cancer and tried to fight a little bit. However, after a couple of chemo sessions, he told Kevin he wanted no more and just wanted to go back to his ranch house. Even though Fritz was a very wealthy man, he chose to be in a little 3-room ranch house. That was very typical of Fritz, and he went back to the ranch house that he loved in north central Texas, where at night he could see every star in the sky. Kevin got him round-the-clock nurses and made sure he was medicated and in as little pain as possible. From what I heard, he even started smoking marijuana to ease his pain. Maybe if Fritz would have smoked pot with me way back when he was so much against it, we might have gotten along a lot better. I never made contact with Fritz after I left World Class in March 1988. After Fritz was diagnosed with cancer, Carl Cox asked me if I wanted to go see him, but I didn't think it would have been a good idea. If I went, Fritz and I would have just ended up in an argument over something that happened 20 years ago. I didn't want to get involved in that, and besides, I'm just not good in those situations. However, I did stay in touch with Kevin and let him know that I was aware of the situation. I also assured him that if there was anything I could do, short of going up there, I would be more than happy to do it. The important thing was that I knew Fritz was well taken care of and provided for, and that he was surrounded by his son and his grandchildren. From all indications that I got from Kevin, Fritz died very peacefully. Even though he was seriously ill with cancer, I truly believe it was the pure agony of his life that did Fritz von Erich in. Even though he smoked 780 packs of cigarettes a day, and his cancer was legit, the emotional pain became more than he could bear, and he simply lost the will to live. He had enough money to get the very best medical care and all kinds of different cancer treatments, and he could have prolonged his life for a number of years. Danny Pletches lived with colon cancer for 6 years. If Fritz wanted life to go on, he had the financial resources to fight as hard and as long as he could, but it just got to the point where life wasn't worth living, and he died 2 months after being diagnosed. In the end, Fritz died the way he lived, on his own terms. He chose not to fight it, and I have to respect that. Fritz and I could never have been described as friends. Business colleagues would be a better way to describe us. Basically, what you saw on TV was our relationship. Did we hate each other? No. Did we have things in common? No. Fritz was a guy that liked to hunt, fish, and live the outdoor life. If I wasn't devoting myself to my 2 children, my head was in the wrestling business. Fritz and I had nothing in common other than wrestling. I was only at Fritz's house twice, and both times were to discuss me taking the booking job for his wrestling office. Fritz and I were good for each other, though. We were both strong-headed, we both had grand ideas, large egos and opinions, and on some occasions we clashed over direction and how things should go, but in the end, we worked well together. At times we liked each other, but at other times we couldn't stand to look at each other's face. That divide between Fritz and I, in reflection, was the reason that World Class fell apart. The 2 of us were instrumental in putting it together and making it work in 1981, and once we split up for good in 1988, it collapsed. Even though I was an employee of his, I never looked at my relationship with Fritz as employee and employer. The reason he never really clicked with his other bookers such as Danny Pletches, Bronco Lubitsch, Red Bastian, Ken Mantell, David Manning, George Scott, and Bruiser Brody was because they didn't have the passion to fight him for their beliefs like I did. That's why he and I were so good together for so long, why he kept coming back to me, and why we will always be so closely associated with one another. Over the years, any kind of resentment over money squabbles Fritz and I had dissipated because, as my son Jason pointed out, "Dad, you only lost a little bit of money. He lost his children." Jason is right.